What's up guys? Welcome to AnimeKouhai. If you'd like to help me out, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel.
Calgurio reflected on his past and realized how such a fool he had been. He smiled as if in relief and reasoned that his friends must share his sentiments.
Thank you. Now that you've said it, I'm a little less anxious. I swear to God that I will keep this emotion in my memory forever.
Calgurio's mind immediately conjured up the image of the demon lord Rimuru at the mention of the term, God. He is His Majesty Rimuru, and he is my deity right now. Calgurio had no place back in the Empire. He would be held accountable for the defeat and executed without a trial. He had no intention of dodging responsibility, but Calgurio did not believe he should waste the life Rimuru had given him. I suppose I might give it some careful thought. Calgurio naturally reasoned that he could take care of himself later. His once self-protective and arousing attitude was no longer on his face.
Let's get right to work. I've brought you all together today to reach an agreement on how we should proceed. I have been graciously given the freedom to talk to you about this by Adelman Dono. Let's make the most of his goodwill and have a good time.
After Calgurio initiated the discussion, everyone present exchanged glances and started talking. In a military meeting, this would have been unimaginable, but Calgurio welcomed it since he wanted to hear everyone's real thoughts. The discussion proceeded for some time. There were essentially just two main points of view left in the discussion: those who insisted they should continue to be subordinate, and those who persisted on returning to the Empire for good. The two factions were at odds with one another. Both sides had valid points, and it was only expected that those with families would insist on going back to the Empire. However, it was up to Demon Lord Rimuru to decide whether or not they would be able to go back to their home. After more discussion, they might be permitted to do so, but if they created too much commotion, the Demon Lord might not be pleased.
As Adelman Dono mentioned, I believe that no plans exist to execute us for no reason. However, we must remember that this does not imply that we are absolved.
The Demon Lord controlled their destiny as long as they had been spared. Although they had some flexibility, it was unclear to what extent their self-centeredness would be tolerated.
In any case, even if we return, we will be put to death. But even so, I want to allow the generals who fought for our nation to return home without incident. I would like to request his favors straight from His Majesty Rimuru.
However, we are essentially held captive. The challenging question is whether or not the home country will provide compensation.
Having been silently taking in everyone's viewpoints, Major General Minutes finally spoke up.
Impossible. We never really anticipated falling short in the first place. We had exhibited such a cruel disposition toward our enemies.
His remarks rendered everyone silent. Since the beginning, the Empire had only ever accepted total surrender. They had only been permitted to be so haughty because they had been winning. If they weren't pardoned, they would be on their own, having battled and been completely defeated. Everyone was aware of this truth and concluded that, even if they did go back to the Empire, things did not seem good. They still desired to uphold their obligation to those who had families though.
The Major General is correct. I'm curious what His Majesty thinks about this.
I hate to say it, but the Intelligence Department made a mistake. Did they even aware there were so many monsters of the Demon Lord class in the world?
One of the officers said something that wasn't appropriate to say.
Hey, you! Take caution with your words. No matter what you think of the Department of Intelligence, you can be assured that the top officials in this nation are the individuals you're calling monsters.
I apologize, I made a mistake.
No one was a monster here, and free speech was encouraged. Since Adelman hadn't been seen since yesterday, Calgurio assumed that he must be meeting somewhere. The military meeting was held today for that reason, but that was not a justification for tolerating all of the remarks. They must never lose sight of their status as prisoners of war.
His Majesty Rimuru may be a kind man, but he won't tolerate insults to his soldiers. Please keep that in mind and use caution when speaking.
Finally, Calgurio said that he agreed with the officer's assessment. At the very least, the fact that Demon Lord Rimuru had a subordinate capable of handling a particularly potent magic like gravity collapse gave some insight into how terrifying he was. Why was there such a serious foe that the Intelligence Bureau was unaware of? However, I completely understand your urge to chastise them for their carelessness. To be really honest, I wanted to tell that falsehood. Calgurio had this internal idea. But then someone said something that made Calgurio and the other officers feel as though ice-cold water had been spilled on them.
Are you all fools? Pay attention, the Intelligence Bureau already had some knowledge at that point.
Bernie, who had been quietly listening to the dialogue the entire time, commented while suddenly breaking out in laughter.
Nonsense. So why did they fail to tell His Majesty of the truth?
Did they turn against us?
Upon hearing Bernie's words, everyone became agitated. Only Calgurio and Minutes exhibited composure. The first person to speak was Minutes.
Bernie, right? I believe you were conducting an undercover mission without our knowledge.
Calgurio was the next.
Of course. It's not surprising that you had access to information that even we weren't aware of because you were a single digit. What did they intend for us to do and what were they thinking?
Everyone's attention was immediately drawn to Bernie when the question was asked. Everyone was curious. The Intelligence Bureau swore utter allegiance to His Majesty the Emperor. It seemed unlikely that they would turn against the Emperor, thus Emperor Rudra was also likely to be aware of the circumstance. Bernie snorted and sent a pitying glance towards Calgurio and the others. Then he dropped the bombshell without any further thought.
As you may have predicted, also from the beginning, His Majesty the Emperor was aware of everything. It was inevitable that you would lose.
How could?
Why do you say that? Did His Majesty deploy his army with the knowledge that we would lose?
No way. You are very rude to His Majesty.
Officers exhibited distress, but some of them had already started to comprehend.
That makes sense, I suppose. We were pawns, in other terms.
Minutes. That's not the right way to express it. I'm afraid the major objective was.
Say nothing, Calgurio. I accept responsibility for the state secret leak. This is not a betrayal of His Majesty because all of you, including me, are dead men.
Bernie was certain about this. He was now the most important figure to lead the path for everyone because he had lost his ability as a single digit, and the ultimate skill the Emperor had given him.
Bernie.
Jiwoo, I'm sorry. I wasn't really devoted to His Majesty. I simply followed him because I knew I could never defeat him.
That was also Bernie's real sentiment. Bernie was a typical student who enjoyed freedom when he was born in the United States 45 years ago. He had somehow gotten to this realm, where Gadra had found him. Damrata took him in and taught him the ways of war. He began to feel good about himself and even proud of being among the greatest in the world. Then a woman who was a close friend of Emperor Rudra broke Bernie's confidence. No, despite her gorgeous beauty, she was a monster. The ultimate being of the universe that could never be attained, regardless of how the heavens and the earth were flipped upside down or how many times a person underwent reincarnation. Such a being was real, though he found it hard to believe. Velgrund was her name. She was one of the Empire's best-kept secrets. Bernie was once accompanied to the Emperor's castle by Damrata. It was a fantastic honor and it helped Bernie achieve his goals. Bernie, who cherished freedom, could not stand the Emperor's tyranny over others. As a result, he had naively imagined trying to topple the Emperor. Extreme terror was the price of such stupidity. There, Bernie had his first encounter with Velgrund. He naturally gave up after realizing what fear really was. Emperor Rudra came up behind the blind and approached Bernie.
You are capable. Keep up the fantastic work and I will provide you my strength as a vessel.
He believed he had heard the emotionless voice of Emperor Rudra coming from a great distance. When he recovered consciousness, he discovered himself in a body incapable of resisting the Emperor.
You know, His Majesty doesn't mind if 1,000,000 of his finest soldiers are killed. It's all part of the strategy, actually.
The majority of people would find it impossible to understand it simply by hearing it, but Calgurio did.
That's it, then. Therefore, they are ready to give up 1,000,000 warriors if it means that some of us, like me, can awaken.
Bernie was a little taken aback by his ability to figure out the right response from such a straightforward explanation, but when he heard Calgurio refer to one who awakened like me, everything made sense to him.
Oh, I see you've also awakened. In such case, you're correct and you understand. The awakened pawns were something that His Majesty the Emperor sought to gather. He thought it would be worthwhile for that reason, even if it required 1,000,000 sacrifices.
Even the most senior officers were unaware of this information. Emperor Rudra had no hopes for the military from the very outset. The most crucial thing was to figure out how to collect awakened people.
Is quality preferred above quantity? Why then did they fail to overcome Veldora 300 years ago, in that case?
With a stern expression on his face, Minutes asked Bernie this. Bernie answered coolly.
Although that makes sense if you think about it, I'm not sure what happened back then. I was capable of killing you on my own. We are so very different in our abilities.
I see. Is that the reason that our defeat was taken into account? A plan that is predicated on the idea that there will be fatalities. While I'd want to convince His Majesty that it was for a worthwhile cause, it was a total failure this time.
That's the way it is. His Majesty the Emperor probably did not anticipate losing after awakening.
Minutes agreed by nodding. Calgurio was watching the exchange with a sour expression on his face.
Unfortunately, I'm to blame for not being good enough.
Bernie disagreed.
Avoid worrying. It wasn't that you weren't good enough. The opponent was simply too formidable.
Yeah, we simply weren't able to defeat that.
Jiwoo agreed by nodding. They had also fallen to Diablo, who had beaten Calgurio. That Calgurio couldn't prevail over a monster they themselves couldn't slay wasn't at all shocking.
Does this imply that the forces here are stronger than the Intelligence Bureau anticipated?
It ought to be. We miscalculated the might of our adversaries, and our strategy to use Demon Lord Rimuru as a springboard to expand our advantage in this situation was thwarted.
Bernie seemed unable to contain his laughter as he talked. Since a lot of sacrifice had been made in vain, the situation was not one that could be lightly mocked. Bernie still believed, though, that Emperor Rudra deserved it.
So, Bernie-kun, since that your surprise attack utilizing us as a distraction appears to have failed, what are your plans after this?
Huh? I explained. I'll accept accountability.
What exactly do you mean?
Minutes gently asked. Everyone in the quiet tent awaited Bernie's response.
Let's be clear about one thing. You folks are already deceased, as I previously stated. I don't mean that metaphorically, but in the sense of His Majesty.
Do you mean to say that His Majesty is opposed to our continued existence?
That's a little misleading. He no longer needs troops whose strength has been stripped from them and whose prospects of awakening have been completely eliminated. If you have no worth to him, he has no reason to defend you.
I guess that's true, then.
On that basis, it is extremely possible that they will refuse to accept the repatriation of prisoners of war. Not just that, though. The anti-war feeling will spread once the remaining soldiers return home. Would that be in line with His Majesty's wishes, in your opinion?
I don't believe so.
Minutes exhaled a sigh. Bernie's point of view was clear to him.
Therefore, since we are no longer of any importance to His Majesty, we are merely a nuisance to the Intelligence Department, right?
Correct.
Will he destroy those who plan to return?
Certainly.
Then they would accuse Tempest, stirring up rage and revenge among their subjects. Bernie confidently stated that the Intelligence Bureau will operate in this manner.
That's it for this video, guys. Thank you for always watching my videos and supporting my channel. Shout out to the new members of AnimeKouhai supporters: Marl Barsha, Jacob Philip Samson, Jason Martin, Sanketh Chalu, Homelike Drop, Edmund, Aditya Vyas, Andrew Lu, Ralph Ignacio, Fawaz Salah, Chris Nelson. Thank you so much for helping out. I'll see you guys in the next video.